During layoffs, my manager told me, it was random, you drew the short straw, but I was the one who built the algorithm that ranked us. So I ran the data again. My metrics were top 3%. I filed a claim. HR called him in mid-lie, and I sat there watching him sweat. Then they asked me one question. Do you want his job? I was laid off on a Thursday morning. It happened fast. No warning. Just a vague, cold calendar invite titled Business Update, Mandatory Attendance. 20 minutes before the meeting, my team chat was buzzing. People were confused. Some thought it was a product reorg or maybe a merger announcement. A few were joking, trying to cut the tension. The meeting started exactly on time. Cameras off, voices low. It wasn't our CEO who spoke. It was someone from HR I didn't recognize. She read a script. Due to shifting market conditions, strategic realignment, impacted employees will be notified within the hour. Then the call ended. Less than 10 minutes later, I got a separate invite from Neil, my manager. 1:1, 15 minutes, quick sync. When I joined, he already looked uncomfortable. He didn't waste time. He said, "Hey, yeah. So, unfortunately, you're one of the ones impacted. I know this is a shock, but the decision was completely performance neutral. It was randomized. Names were pulled based on headcount, not contribution. You just drew the short straw." He didn't even sound sad. He sounded rehearsed. Then he added, "I really believe you'll land somewhere great. You've got strong skills." I nodded, didn't ask questions, just said thanks. I knew there was no point. But here's the thing, I wasn't just a developer. I was the lead backend engineer who designed the scoring model they said they used to make these cuts. Back in February, we were asked to build an internal evaluation system, supposedly to create fair, data-driven ways to assess engineering productivity, mentorship, code quality, and velocity. It was meant to protect against biased layoffs. I poured months into it. It was complicated and rigorous, and we had testing guardrails and transparency policies built in. So, when Neil said it was random, I knew immediately that something was off. The whole point of the model was that nothing about it was random. After that call, I just sat still for about an hour. Then I opened my laptop. I still had access to some internal sandboxes, stuff I'd spun up for development, but never decommissioned. I hadn't thought much about them since. I pulled up the latest copy of the ranking data, the base model untouched. I was ranked 7th out of 248 backend engineers. Top 3%. Not borderline. Not even close. I reran the metrics, reviewed every scoring component, commit quality, peer feedback, review turnaround, sprint velocity, number of high-priority tickets closed, mentorship flags. I had full access to the formula. I built most of it. The numbers didn't lie. So then I checked the override logs. Every instance where a manager manually tagged someone as at risk despite the data, there were 14 overrides in total. One of them was mine. It had been entered 4 days before the layoffs. The flag was vague. Productivity concern. No comments, no incident, no documentation. Just that tag. It was entered by Neil. My stomach turned. I remembered how he acted in the weeks before. Weirdly cold, short with me in meetings, didn't call on me to present our monthly update, even though I'd been the one to lead the last sprint. I chalked it up to stress. I thought maybe he was just dealing with pressure from the top. I didn't think he'd single me out. I stayed up all night pulling documentation, every email where I'd sent performance updates, graphs, peer feedback. I still had them all. I wrote up a clean packet, just the facts. No accusations. The next morning, I sent it directly to HR. I didn't go to Neil. I didn't talk to anyone else. The email was simple. I'm requesting a review of my layoff status. I believe the decision may have been made using an inaccurate override of performance data. Supporting documentation is attached. No one responded that day. But the next morning, I got a reply from the director of HR and someone from legal. They invited me to a clarification meeting. When I logged in, Neil was already in the virtual room. He looked caught off guard. He didn't say anything, just looked down. The HR director greeted me and got straight to it. She said, "We've reviewed your documentation. Thank you for being thorough. We wanted to have this meeting to get clarification on how the override was entered and why." She turned to Neil. "Do you remember entering a productivity concern for my name?" Neil looked nervous. He nodded slowly, said, "Yeah. I just felt like there were signs of slipping, some delays, a few bugs, missed meetings." He wasn't even specific. Then legal pulled up my raw metrics. I could see his eyes flicker when the dashboard popped up. The numbers were clean. Better than clean, they were exceptional. The HR director asked, "Were you aware of this data at the time of your override?" Neil said nothing for a long time. Then he mumbled, "I don't think I had the full picture." The HR person's tone shifted. "You had full access. The logs confirm you viewed this data 3 times that week." Silence. Then she turned to me and said the words I never thought I'd hear. "Would you consider returning in a leadership role?" I just stared at her. For a second I thought I misheard. She added, "Neil's position is now under review. Depending on your interest, we could open that position to internal promotion." I nodded. I didn't say a word. I just nodded. They ended the meeting shortly after. Neil didn't say anything else. I got the offer 2 days later. Same salary plus a bump. Direct report headcount, 12 engineers. But what I found out after I stepped into his role, what was hidden in his email archive and buried in his project notes, made everything much worse. The promotion felt strange from the start. I'd gone from packing up my desk to getting on board into Neil's role in less than a week. My badge was reactivated, my calendar repopulate, and I was invited to the same leadership calls I'd once quietly taken notes on from the sidelines. No one on my old team looked me in the eye at first. They were polite, but distant. I wasn't sure if they resented me or if they were just confused. After all, 1 week ago I was a peer. Now, I was the one assigning projects and reviewing their sprint retros. But I didn't have time to focus on that. Because the first thing I noticed once I got access to Neil's drives was that something was off. His inbox was a mess. Hundreds of unread emails. Project folders unlabeled. Notes stored in random docs with cryptic names like follow-up for and risk PPL. It looked more like the laptop of someone who had mentally checked out than that of a senior engineering manager. Then I started seeing the patterns. In one document titled Adjustments Q2, I found a list of engineer names. Some had little comments next to them like safe bet quiet, needs push, or questionable. Next to my name, potential threat, knows too much. I read that line 5 times. That's when I realized this went deeper than a simple override. I dug further. Inside an old email thread, I found a forwarded message from Neil to someone in the product department. The subject was Headcount Rationale Draft. Inside the body, he wrote, "Need to make space for incoming referrals. Want to clear out blockers who question process. Will justify using scoring tool plus overrides." It was dated a full month before the layoffs. I checked the referral log. Sure enough, 3 of Neil's incoming referrals had already been interviewed by then. 2 of them had the same last name as a VP in marketing. Another one was someone Neil had played golf with, mentioned in his LinkedIn testimonials. So now it made sense. He used the algorithm, my algorithm, as a mask, then used his override access to quietly flag top performers he didn't like, people who disagreed with him in meetings, people who noticed when he missed deadlines, people like me. I wasn't laid off because I underperformed. I was laid off because I challenged him. Once during a planning meeting, when I pointed out that he misrepresented our sprint velocity to execs, I hadn't been rude. I'd just been honest. But I remember the look he gave me afterward. Cold. Like I'd embarrassed him. It didn't stop there. Over the next week, I kept finding evidence. Slack messages he never deleted. Notes where he tracked who spoke up in retros. One where he wrote, "Too many questions, red flag." Another said, "Team loyalty matters more than metrics." He was systematically targeting people who didn't fall in line. Then came the worst part. A junior engineer, Tanya, knocked on my office door one afternoon. She looked nervous, like she debated whether to even come. She said, "I know you're in charge now. I don't want to stir anything." But Neil used to call some of us late at night. Not for work, just talking. Weird stuff. I started ignoring his calls, and suddenly he gave me a low initiative tag on my review. I asked if she had proof. She nodded and showed me a screenshot. A message from Neil at 12:37 a.m. "You around? Want to talk shop?" Another said, "I like how you listen. Don't let others mess with your growth here." Then, weeks later, "Not seeing the hunger lately. You might want to step it up." I was shaking when I read it. She wasn't the only one. Two more engineers told me privately that Neil used performance reviews as leverage. One said he was told, "If you're loyal, I'll protect you." None of them had felt safe coming forward until now. I compiled it all. The override logs, the referral favoritism, the manipulation, the inappropriate late-night messages. Then I went to HR again. They said they'd look into it. But I could tell from their faces, this wasn't a surprise. They knew something. They'd just never had it all laid out this clearly before. And while they investigated, I quietly reached out to someone else. A former teammate, one of the people Neil laid off the same week as me. She was a single mom, top 10% performer, and had never been given a reason. She told me she thought it was her fault, that she wasn't enough of a team player. I told her the truth. Then I sent her all the data. And I didn't stop there. Because the more I dug, the more I realized Neil wasn't the only one doing this. When I found out Neil wasn't the only one abusing the system, everything changed. At first, I thought he was just a bad manager who went rogue, using his override access to settle petty scores and bring in his friends. But once I started looking into the override logs across departments, a pattern emerged. Overrides were supposed to be rare, reserved for edge cases. According to the internal documentation I helped write, no more than 3 to 5% of employees in any given cycle should have been tagged manually. But in Q2, nearly 18% of terminations across engineering had an override flag. I only found that because I had access to raw backend data, not the dashboards most people used. The surface-level reporting made it look compliant. But the logs told a different story. There were multiple managers doing what Neil had done. In fact, two of them had more overrides than Neil, and their notes were sloppy or more careless. Things like low energy, doesn't vibe with team, never turns camera on, probably disengaged, smart but cynical, personal stuff going on, could be a risk. One override literally said, "Don't deal with her next quarter." I started cross-referencing names. Several of the people who got let go were top-ranked by the system I helped build. And many had one thing in common: they had challenged or questioned their managers publicly or refused to do overtime without compensation. I had the receipts, all of them. At first, I thought I'd bring it to HR. But after my last meeting with them, I started doubting their integrity. They'd clearly known something and chose to stay quiet. Then I found the kicker. While going through archived meeting recordings, which I only had access to in Neil's role, I watched a quarterly planning call from 3 months before the layoffs. In that call, a senior director, Neil's skip level, joked, "If we can't get budget approval, we'll have to do the usual, clean out the disruptors and call it a strategy." He laughed. A few others did too. No one objected. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about Neil. It was culture. Quiet, systemic elimination of people who didn't play politics, people who set boundaries, people who weren't social enough, people like me. The algorithm I built, the one they used as a cover, had been marketed as fair, objective, and data-driven. Instead, they used it like camouflage, to make targeted cuts look like math. I couldn't unsee any of it. So I made a decision. I started quietly contacting others who'd been laid off. Former coworkers, peers, even people from departments I'd never worked in directly. I didn't tell them what to do. I just sent them their data, performance scores, feedback history, override tags. For some, it was the first time they realized they'd been targeted. One person cried. Another asked if I was sure it wasn't a mistake. One of them was a father of two who had moved cross-country for the job just 8 months earlier. His override said, overconfident, not culturally aligned. Another had volunteered to lead a DI initiative. Her override? Too vocal, possibly divisive. I sent them everything. And then, without putting my name on it, I compiled a report. 50 pages. I detailed the override patterns, the referral favoritism, the messaging, the internal recordings, the disparities. I blacked out personal identifiers, but kept enough in to make the story clear. I included the original algorithm design doc with my name on it and a note at the end. This system was not built to be used this way. It was hijacked to give cover to biased terminations. I didn't send it to HR. I sent it to every single executive level leader at the company, the board, the external ethics hotline, and one other place, a journalist who had once covered our company's innovative HR model in a glowing article. Within 48 hours, my inbox started filling up. But the most unexpected message of all came from someone I hadn't heard from since the layoffs began, the CEO. She wanted to speak. Privately. Off the record. Because, as it turns out, someone had been quietly logging these behaviors for over a year, and they weren't in HR, legal, or management. They were closer to the center than I ever expected. The CEO's message came through on a Sunday morning. Subject line, need to talk off record. Just that, no greeting, no context. I stared at it for a long time. We'd never spoken directly. Not once. She was this distant, polished figure who only appeared in company-wide all-hands and glossy LinkedIn posts. I figured she either wanted to threaten me into silence or bury the story before it exploded. But when we finally spoke over a secure video call, what I heard caught me completely off guard. She didn't open with a denial or a defense. She said, I've been tracking what Neil and others were doing. Quietly. I didn't have enough proof to act until your report. Then she added, I need you to know I didn't approve of this culture. It grew under me, yes, but I didn't see it early enough. That's on me. I didn't say much. I didn't trust her yet. She told me she'd already forwarded my dossier to the board's audit committee, that an emergency review was underway, that outside counsel had been hired, and then she said carefully, I want you to be part of fixing this. Not just internally, publicly. At first, I said no. I was exhausted. I didn't trust any of them. But then I remembered the woman who cried when I sent her the logs, the dad who moved across the country and lost everything, the junior engineer Neil harassed, the DI lead who was flagged as divisive. I told the CEO I'd help, under one condition: full transparency. The company had to admit what happened. No PR spin. No mistakes were made. They had to show the override logs, the ratios, the bias. She agreed, and that was the beginning. Within 2 weeks, 5 directors were terminated. 3 managers, including Neil, were publicly named in an internal ethics release. All had their severance revoked. Neil's access was shut off the morning the investigation concluded. I heard from someone in finance that he tried to claim intellectual property over the algorithm in a last-ditch effort to threaten legal action. He had nothing, because I had documented everything, every commit, every change, every access log, all of it signed, time-stamped, and mirrored in our internal code registry, under my name. I kept going. The company offered me a higher leadership title, Senior Director of Engineering Ops, with an open remit to rebuild everything: the evaluation model override policy, internal performance processes. I said yes, but only after every person who was wrongfully terminated received a formal apology compensation, and if they wanted rehire offers with back pay. 22 people came back. Some didn't want to return, and I respected that, but almost all of them said the same thing: thank you. I thought it was just me. Then I made one more move. I went to legal and got permission to unseal the override logs permanently for all employees. Now, every person in the company could see if someone had flagged them, and why. No more hiding behind vague tags or back-channel whispers. That alone scared off half the middle managers who'd quietly thrived under the old system. Good. Let them run. The journalist I sent the dossier to, she published a feature 3 weeks later titled Algorithm of Silence: How One Engineer Exposed a Corporate System Built to Punish Dissent. It went viral on LinkedIn, Reddit, everywhere. The company didn't deny a single fact. They even linked to the article in a company-wide town hall. The CEO opened the meeting by saying, "This happened. It happened on my watch. And it ends now." Neil tried to comment on the article anonymously. I knew it was him, the same bitter tone, the same deflections. He blamed me for misinterpreting management intent. He said I used revenge to build a career. But no one listened. His LinkedIn profile quietly disappeared a few months later. Someone told me he tried to start a consultancy, but no one hired him. Too risky. His name was now associated with bias, corruption, and lies. And me? I didn't feel proud. Not exactly, but I felt clean. For the first time in years, I could walk into a meeting and not wonder who was being pushed out in secret. The walls were gone. The silence was broken. And I made sure everyone remembered exactly who built the system and who tore it down when it was used to hurt people.